I guess this one is partially directed specifically at me and not just at the Orthodox. If you believe in evolution and historical scholarship, aren't you really saying man is wiser than God and his word? Um, Evolution. To the to anybody but the blind, I think even the blind understand this. Obviously, two creation stories. One where the deity is known as Elohim, which is translated God, G-O-D, which is chapter 1 to chapter 2, verse 3 of Genesis. And then from chapter 2, verse 4, I believe, on, it's Yahweh, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D is how it's translated. In one creation story, 7 days, which aren't literal days. The day could mean in that day, when that day comes. In the day when we were fighting the war. Back in the day. It clearly meant epoch. The earliest Christian writers talked about this, because there were other things taken too literally, and they use the creation story as being like, because nobody would ever believe that that was literal, because the sun and the moon are made on like the 4th day, so how can you have 24-hour days? And all throughout Scripture, day is used as we pretty much use it today, back in the day, you know. So you have you have this first creation narrative where God made man in his own image, male and female he made them. And the second one is the Garden of Eden, Adam, the rib, Eve. That's pretty obvious. And with modern scholarship, does that change any of our doctrines or creeds? Evolution is a scientific fact. We're not delusional. The Earth is only 6,000 years old. And creationism is only 150 years old. No, a little less than that. And it's been rejected by the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern Orthodox Church has never even spoke on it, because it's not... I mean, for the vast majority of time, people assume that the Earth was millions of years old. Billions, shocker. Again, where does your faith come from? Does it come from... Here's a question. You're willing to take a creation narrative and a creation narrative, and there's 2 more in Genesis, by the way, so 4 creation narratives, all of them super and hyper literally. But when Christ says, "This is my body and blood," he must have been on meth. Or when St. Peter says, "Baptism now saves you," that can't be literal. So I'm highly suspect of those people who will say the obviously 2 creation accounts, one by Elohim, the other by Yahweh. And I'm not saying that those are 2 different gods. Or that, scholarship of the Bible, that's bad. We have to be super literal with the old Jewish part of the Bible. But, when it comes to the actual words of the living Christ, upon which our salvation depends, you know what? He probably wasn't. He couldn't have been speaking literally. People understood him clearly when he said, "You must eat of my flesh and my blood and drink of my blood, people walked away. They knew exactly what he was talking about. Now, is the Eucharist a symbol of his body and blood? Yes. Is it truly his body and blood? Yes. Why? Because both of those were revealed. And guess what? We go by what's revealed, and we don't change things. That's how the Orthodox roll. Catholics have transubstantiation. The Calvinists have receptionist theory. We go, Christ said it. There's been nothing more explained on it by anyone else, none of the apostles. They just reaffirmed the words of Christ. So our logic will not interfere with the mysteries of salvation. Baptism and the Eucharist. The holy mysteries. When St. Peter says, baptism now saves you, I mean, what is the evangelical response to that? Fuck you, Peter. You must be drunk, you crack-smoking cocksucker. I mean, honestly, baptism is an outward sign of inward change. You must deny scientific fact. The fact that the Christian worldview invented science because we weren't pagans, we could actually study the world. The entire universe was created by God. God was the creator of the physical world, but not part of it. And that's how we got modern science. Throw that out the window and embrace a form of paganism. And don't say, hey, maybe this was written for the people at the time to understand. And that there's deep, deep truths in there that relate to our spirituality, not necessarily a science book. It's not necessarily a science textbook. But when it comes to the words of Christ and his chief apostle and the Apostle Paul, you can't believe a word out of their mouth. They were half the time that Christ, Peter, and Paul were smoking crack. That's the attitude that I find most of these quote-unquote biblical literalists and creationists have towards Scripture. Two creation accounts, obviously different, obviously conflicting. There's no wisdom. Hey, where did Cain get his wife? Isn't that something to make you think, to make you meditate upon? Right? The conflicting days of the story of Noah, how he was in the ark. How language spread. Did it spread naturally, as it says in one point in the story of Noah, or was it Tower of Babel? But no. See, you take all that hyper literally, but when it gets to Christ, Paul, and Peter, when they say things blatantly clear that were understood even by Martin Luther understood them the exact same way 2nd and 3rd century Christians understood them. This is my body and blood. Yup. That's always been believed. Baptism now saves you and it brings you into the new covenant. Yup. Well, now that we need to throw that away. To me, it's hard for me to believe that these people are actual Christians who reject evolution and reject historical criticism. Guess what? We get none of our beliefs from the Bible. We wrote the Bible. It took us 300 years to compile the New Testament canon. The church existed long before any of those writings. It started at Pentecost. And all of our beliefs were already there. So were our practices.